imagine if a country like China went with a third of their population. This is what moved them when Mao was in office. And Mao was a staunch communist, and really predicated on socialism before they went into what's now private sector socialism under Dao Jinping. But it moved them from an agrarian society into where they are now, modernization, but there had to remain an emphasis on human capital. Don't get me wrong, they certainly modernized. When we look at
70 years.
Yes,
70 years.
70 years, haven't spent on wars. They had a war chest to be able to spend on economic development, but you can't have 400 or 500 million people just nowhere, with no jobs, no prospects, not contributing to the community, not contributing to the production at large, but somehow we are trained that that's good for us, and that's literally what we're doing. It's like I hearken back to Garvey. Marcus Garvey called this literally back in 1916. And his approach to what was known as Garveyism or scientific socialism, which for the record was not based on Marxism at all. It was predicated on African communalism. So when we talk about public domains for the land, there are some countries, like even Barbuda, for example, they still practice communal land.
Yes.
So that's all rooted in an approach that puts the emphasis in the public's hands.
That's correct.
So what does innovation become from that lens then? What does modernization become from the lens of human value first? And that's really the approach. When we look at, when we strip the titles, when we strip the politics, when we strip the demonization, exactly, it's like, what is the value of this type of system versus this type of system? And at the end of the day, people should come before modernization, should come before technology that will either make people obsolete. Is what good is getting robotics? What good is shooting to the moon if we can't even take care of the land that we're standing on? Right? So
no, you're absolutely right.
I think that's
in Marianola, Spain, it was a little island, okay? There were all these people unemployed, and they had this land. So one capitalist had this idea, I'm going to get a big combine and raise wheat.
Yep.
So they said, no, we're going to employ thousands of people growing artichokes. Those people had no jobs. So they grew artichokes, and everybody was working, and everybody could afford to live, and they exchanged whatever they made for artichokes to buy clothing and food and rent.
Right.
So that's exactly what you're saying. Even though that was more primitive,
right,
it doesn't matter. It's where anything is at that moment. People have to survive.
Right, because I think folks will jump the argument of like a fiat versus barter. It's like we can, we're smart enough at this point. We have enough history behind us where I think we're actually pretty lucky in a sense from a human development standpoint to live in the time that we do, where we have enough history behind us to be able to see like, oh, here was a mistake, here was a mistake, here was a mistake. Okay, well, let's not repeat that particular mistake, but we can still maybe implement some of the good decisions. So can we have a fiat currency because, hey, if I don't like artichokes, but you like my vest and I need an artichoke, well, maybe I don't want to do a food for good barter exchange, but
we have currency instead.
Exactly. So here's this currency. 100%.
I don't mind fiat currency.
But should that Fed be owned by the people? And that's where, and I think that's the difference in the way that we approach, even our central banking. Can our institutions still exist? 100%, because at the end of the day, still people, there still needs to be a level of governing. It's just understanding what is the intention to these institutions, who is owning these institutions,
That's
and
the
what is the
profit.
and that's exactly it. So
I think I think a lot of what we're saying is, it seems like, common sense, but apparently the powers that be aren't really, don't really feel that way. But I mean, the people, I'm not say the gatekeepers, the people who should be looking out for the public, whether it's economists or
elected
policymakers,
officials.
they're all like, they've all like, I wouldn't say been asleep at the wheel. They're all like, I wouldn't say on the take, but nobody's looking out for the public.
That's right.
Nobody's looking out for the public, and I mean, nobody. I mean, you're talking about
No, I agree.
policymakers,
Nobody. Yeah.
Federal Reserve, media, and it has to be something that's gonna wake people up. And the only thing I can think of would be some type of social unrest or anarchy, because it just can't keep.
Well, it's happening as we speak in
Right.
places like Cameroon, Togo, South Africa, Haiti, Bolivia, Chile,
Yeah, especially
Hong
Bolivia
Kong,
lately, yeah.
where people are fighting back.
The UK and Brexit.
Right.
Yeah.
When we look at actual revolutions,
Yeah.
I look at Haiti because Haiti were the original revolutionaries, and to see that they for over a year and gotten very little coverage in the U.S. that nonstop, almost the entire population of Haiti has been fighting against the government because this government that is currently in power is not for the people. And at some point, it can't be everybody's wrong when these 12 people are right.
Yeah.
It can't be that we can't all be equally idiots and
It doesn't matter who you
just
vote for,
don't
because they're not for
see-
you.
Exactly. So to your point, yeah, it will take that type of catalyst before we see some change, because otherwise, yeah, we're just a group of guys chatting, and some people will agree, some folks are going to look at this and be like, yep, you're an idiot, he's crazy, here's an example, and kind of start stripping down everything being said to
But I think
for the status quo. But at the end of the day,
What do you do? Yeah.
I think the powers that be are trying to in some ways trying to co-opt the message. Now you hear maybe some of these hedge fund managers saying, "Oh, we're gonna have social unrest. There's gonna be a civil war." I think you have people trying to co-opt the message. But if you raise enough hell and you're loud enough to say, "Tell me where I'm wrong," you start to make people, uneasy. When I went to that Darden event a few years ago, I basically broke it down. This is economic theory. This is totally against history, and basically saying there's too many investment bankers, and people are looking like they had no answer. There's too many
The investor
investment
class.
bankers. Right. You're
Yeah.
telling me that people need to retrain themselves. Why nobody told Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley to retrain themselves? What are you talking about?
It's absolutely
But anyway, so I think people also, the country is reacting also by turning to opiates as well. So that's a nice segue into the.
That's a big thing that's old.
Yeah.
It's a very it's ingrained. I find it interesting. The Portuguese, and you spoke about Mao. They had the opium revolt.
Yep.
Okay, and it was really Mao that ended it, meaning that the opium revolt was against England, and because they were producing opium in Bengal, what is now Bangladesh,
Yep.
and
East India
importing it
Trading Company.
into China, and then trading it for all the things we love. It was big in Europe more, of course. China, porcelain, silk, whatever they had, and so they had the opium wars, but he stamped it out because gunboat policy.
Yep.
England did it. We did it in Japan
Yep.
with Commodore Perry. Went with a gunboat and
Yeah.
said, if you don't let us in with trading, we're going to come in and attack you. So I find it most interesting, however, that if you look at the Rockefeller organization, which we're going to only look at a part of it. It's a big organization. They have vertically integrated banking, railroads, oil. The, the amount of businesses they own that are in the healthcare business, which I actually call an illness care business, is astronomical. The Rockefeller Institute up on the Upper East Side. So basically, the companies that you sent us a link today, and those companies that Trump wants to sue, which is really a token gesture, but there are directly. Of course, they'll go bankrupt if they lose a lawsuit because they have so much debt.
Yeah.
You saw the amounts, okay? So basically, by eliminating those companies, those are artificial opiates.
Right, exactly.
They're made of oil. So what the history of the big eats small
Yep.
is that we get rid of competition.
Yeah.
And so you see certain companies that are in the pharmaceutical business that are in petrochemicals they're gonna get rid of a bunch of competition now.
Yeah.
And I see that when we saw the US Marines guarding opium factories in Vietnam, because those owners of such establishments were the Vietnamese warlords that we teamed up with. We see the Iran-Contra deals, that was drugs, raise money for drugs. The Portuguese did it, the English did it. There was a group called the Boston Brahmins, like the English, or the Indian Brahma, you know?
Yep.
And they were the richest families. They were in Narragansett, they were in Nantucket, Rhode Island, they were in Boston, Massachusetts, and they had ships, they had slaves in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Haiti, making sugar, because they had slaves doing it.
Yep.
Then they made the slaves make the rum, then they would sell the rum, and all this money they would do the drugs, go to China, and they were making opium 250 years ago, 200 years ago, and even more really in the 19th century. And it's interesting to see that those wealthy families are still the arms dealers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a connection to human trafficking, and in certain places we know that. And those are the big ones, the arms, the drugs, and the human trafficking, because those are slaves. And so you're really not paying for that human labor.
Yeah.
You know, they figured out that under our slave program, when I say our, I know I'm whiter than white, but I know how to slave. What I'm saying is that it was 1/6, so one slave paid for 6. So 16% was expense. So
Yeah.
if you had 350 slaves, you really had benefited from the labor of 300 people. So I'm saying that it's not much different than today. It's
Right.
the Dutch West India Company kind of all over again.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at it, and they make a profit because now that person needs care,
Yep.
and they're in the care business.
Yeah.
They'll make you, Suboxone makes, I guess a drug called, a couple companies are making drugs to treat opiate addiction. But I guess from a high level, the number of accidental deaths are rising at an alarming rate.
Yes.
And drug-related deaths accidental overdoses have now surpassed car accidents.
That's right, I read that. And
Right.
so the last thing I'll say on this, because I'm hogging the show here.
No, it's fine.
Is that, what was I gonna, it slipped out of my mind, claim old. I'll think about it in a minute, but it's germane to what I'm saying. And anyway, there's a reduction in competition and an increase in business for the people that are gonna stay in power.
Right, but the number of accidental deaths are being driven by opiates and drug overdoses, and of the drug overdoses, opiate-related overdoses are driving.
They've surpassed driving,
Right.
and so that's what it is. If we key into what we've been talking about before, that people are so dissatisfied that there's an automatic weakness to become addicted.
Yeah.
It's like an addictive trait when you're depressed, or when you go out and shoot. It's like suicide by cop, right? Like if you go out and shoot a bunch of people.
Right.
So that's the arms.
Yeah.
You know, it's. I think people become weakened by the system. There's no hope.
Right.
And so they're more likely to become addicted.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
But that's what I want.
That's the point that nobody's making, but that's the connection nobody's making. But of the opiate-related deaths, if you bifurcate fentanyl, you see fentanyl is its own sort of entity, and that fentanyl is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest, opiates out there.
That's right, for cancer patients.
Right, it's for critical care cancer patients. Now, why would this be on the street? I have no idea. But President Trump sued the opiate manufacturers. So he vowed to sue the opiate manufacturers a couple years ago. And they think it's a proliferation of drugs, proliferation of opiate prescriptions that's driving the opiate crisis, because the prescriptions are also going through
Yes.
the roof. And it's a narrative. It's a popular narrative out there that the scenario where now doctors have been pushed to prescribe more drugs. In some cases they have been. In the case of NSYS, which makes fentanyl, they were actually paying doctors to prescribe fentanyl or Subsys, which was a variation of fentanyl. And then I think Purdue Pharma was actually paying some of the doctors to prescribe Oxycontin.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
but
Yeah.
The narrative is that little Bobby had a toothache and he was prescribed opiates, overprescribed opiate, which wouldn't have been prescribed to him 20 years ago. Now, when the doctor cut him off, he became addicted to opiates, so then he turned to heroin.
Yep.
So that's the popular
Because
narrative.
an organic
That's
grouping.
right. That's
Yeah.
that's the popular narrative, but it's not necessarily the case. You see that a lot of people who are on opiates had already tried something else or another drug previously. But other connections that in the Rust Belt areas, particularly coal country, a lot of people were turning to opiates earlier than everybody else. It started to materialize in coal country when the Obama administration was de-emphasizing coal and I guess maybe emphasizing other sources of energy. I know now low natural gas prices competing with coal, which is driving down coal use and also alternative energy sources, and then causing coal use to decline. And it also bleeds over into like companies like CSX and NS and Norfolk Southern, who where coal is one of the biggest products that they actually ship. But to make a long story short, we started seeing it materialize in coal country in the Rust Belt areas like Ohio, West Virginia. Some of the most hardest hit counties of the counties and cities that are suing now, we'll get into that later, come from West Virginia and Ohio. And nobody ever made that connection that these people are out of jobs. When I just say out of jobs, when your grandfather worked in a coal mine, your father worked in a coal mine, and I work in a coal mine, not just you're out of a job, it's like it's a skill that
It's passed down. It becomes a tradition.
Right. Exactly, and nobody made that connection that started materializing in the opiate addiction started materializing in Rust Belt areas and coal country first.
I think it speaks to, even because, I think one, there's a lot to unpack there, and it's all cyclical as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it, touches each other in a very succinct way. One, I think when we see any type of almost social test market, it's typically done on the working or marginalized classes. So, if we look back a century prior to the implementation of labor laws, so got a post-Reconstruction era, on the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, folks are working 20 hours a day, pennies on the dollar, no breaks. We see forces of folks joining together, even from populist movements to even Pan-African movement, Black nationalist movements, A. Philip Randolph, more integrationist cohesiveness. But the whole point is that we recognize that there was this common thread that, hey, you're being exploited, I'm being exploited. Even if one group is being exploited more than another group is being exploited, let's combine forces and push for some change. So when we look at this same type of pattern, in other words, we see that same, fast forward 40 years, because that's kind of where the baby boomers come from. FDR puts together this wonderful New Deal. You now have a retirement plan. You now have access to FHA loans, unless you were black. You now have access to credit.
That's qualified.
Exactly.
Qualified for everything.
Exactly. Like, no black people had access to any piece of the New Deal, but the majority of the country, we're in a good spot. and often the Make America Great Again, that's really the era that most folks are talking about, but then up rises the auto industry, GM, Chrysler, Ford. When you look at the Rust Belt, that's where the name comes from. Detroit, Pittsburgh, Indiana, Chicago. And when, a lot of these jobs, even from coal mining to fisheries, refineries, the auto industry, where you could have a high school diploma and make six figures easily. I mean, my grandmother was one of the first black engineers at GM, worked at the Hamtramck plant. And there were plenty of folks that high school diplomas, and you're talking about in the 60s and 70s making $30 an hour, $35 an hour. At that point, even if I'm black, as I can't step into a bank redlining, even if I can step into the bank, the likelihood of me getting loan is extremely minimal. Even if I'm lucky enough to get the loan, I'm gonna pay easily 8 to 10 points higher on the interest rate, and with a shorter payback period, thereby exacerbating the
Keeps you in
loan.
place.
Exactly. So even with all of that, it still empowered folks saying, you know what, I don't even need to step into the bank. I'll work for a year, 2 years straight. Here's the cash.
Right.
I'm gonna pay for things in cash. When you look at each one of those cities in the Rust Belt, they peaked 60s, 70s, rise of the UAW comes into place with the union, and when jobs began to get pushed out first in the country, just spread out, now we begin to see that decline. Detroit has never recovered. Detroit is the only large city that has ever been declined for federal funding. They gave TARP funds.
You talking about Detroit?
Detroit got TARP. We gave TARP funds to the bankers. Detroit was the only large city that they said, no, we can't do it. I'll leave it to speculation that it's still the last city that's predominantly black at 86% black. But I'll just throw that in there. But however, the point is that they still never recovered. They never recovered from the 70s.
It's not part of the system.
And exactly. So in other words, thinking about from the 70s, that's almost 2 generations.
Yes.
So you're growing into a community that's continually divested, continually deprived education of opportunities. It's going to create this environment where it's a festering. And now we get politicians standing on podiums calling the folks that are in these environments super predators and creating criminal law bills, 3 strikes. And so in other words, we've seen this before many times over. We can almost pick a decade and throw a dart at it. And we can pull out these examples. So when we look at coal mining, when we look at the counties, when we look at the counties in Ohio, it's the same thing. It's just the demographic difference.
Right, exactly.
And that's, we can spend a whole other segment speaking to why the war on drugs, we've already confirmed.
It never was really a war on drugs anyway.
It was never a war on drugs.
Because they picked up the small user, the small dealer.
Exactly.
But the CIA was in business.
Where is the CIA's lawsuit?
Right.
We already have confirmation from decades ago.
Right.
It went from the whispers and the rumors to,
right.
You are, the conspiracy theorists. Well, now we have hard evidence.
They take weirdos.
Exactly.
And I mean like Geraldo, let's say, right?
Right.
He's not a real weirdo, but they make him look weird.
Yep.
And then he says conspiracy. So they go, well, if he's saying it.
Well, you also had the guy, the journalist from the San Jose Mercury,
Right.
Who was writing the articles. I think
And
he
he's-
disappeared.
So they ruled it. They ruled 2 shots to the head suicide.
Right, you don't shoot
Yeah,
yourself.
suicide.
Right. They
Right. So-
ruled it
Funny thing,
suicide.
But they made it seem like this guy was some kook, and he was saying this stuff, and let's be real. Like we start talking about what he was saying when nobody else was saying it.
Right.
The type of stuff we're saying that nobody else is saying.
Nobody was saying it,
You know,
yeah.
that people look at you like you're from Neptune. People look at you like you're from Neptune.
Whistleblowers never get treated kindly.
Right.
Like the messenger always gets killed.
Right.
Yeah.
I had someone tell me that their mother didn't like my book because I wasn't praising Obama in the book or something. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Like, you want me to books praising Obama? You want me to buy one of them? But if you put yourself in, let's say go back to the analogy I was making earlier. People saying you don't have a job, you should have been your fault. You want an engineer.
Right.
Put yourself in the government's perspective shoes. There's an opiate crisis, right? And let's say back in the 70s, if you were black and you said, or even the 80s, 90s, you said this crack epidemic is a medical issue.
Yeah.
People looked like you had 2 heads. Now, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
the opiate crisis is a medical issue. But people were saying that years ago.
Yeah.
But
Right.
now you have these policymakers. You have an opiate crisis. There they point the finger at the drug companies.
Yep.
They're doing it. Nobody wants to point the finger
Yeah,
at
it's
nobody.
your fault, you know.
But nobody point the finger. Nobody not point the finger. Nobody point out that this opiate crisis is materializing in these parts of the country where jobs are just disappearing.
That's right, it's a physics to it, there's an actual physics, and we're part of that physics, the human emotion, the human psyche.
Yep.
Some things are gonna happen, then other things are gonna happen.
Right, and I think the country is telling us that when you start talking about it's a disconnect between the government's talking about how great the economy is and we have an opiate crisis, and
Yeah.
and also kids are singing about
Yeah.
opiates. They're singing about Percocet, Molly Percocet.
Sure.
Right.
They're singing about songs about having Xanax and
And it's easy to get addicted to
Right,
that stuff. I had a
right.
toothache, and I was like, this stuff's pretty good stuff, you know? You can see it in a short scale of what you're saying, if you study the Erie Canal, okay? In 1800, Clinton, no related to Bill Clinton, okay? They were in New York, upstate New York, even downstate, even in the city, there's Clinton everything. Clinton Street, Clinton Park,
Yeah, that's true.
there's Clintonville, Clintondale. They owned thousands and maybe millions of acres in New York. And the first Clinton wanted New York to be a separate country after the Revolution, but before the ratification of the Constitution.
Interesting.
And so the Federalist Papers, which were written by Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton, were letters to the people of New York about why they should join the Union. Anyway, this guy engineered, it was the largest public works undertaking up to that point ever. The building of the Erie Canal. It would link the Hudson River to Lake Erie.
Yeah.
And the thought was that the things would come from Europe, and then the refined goods go up to the heartland, and then conversely, all of the beaver, timber, stuff would come down from all of the Great Lakes,
Right.
down to Hudson River and leave. So we were going to be the port, the only deep water port. So basically, that canal was replaced by the railroad under Rockefeller. And so all those little communities that were built because you had a boat, a
Right.
village, a little inn, those jobs went, just like you're talking about,
Right.
on a smaller scale.
Right.
Then when the railroads came, they built bigger cities and then fewer stops.
Yeah.
Then they replaced the railroads by the New York State Thruway, which links Buffalo with New York City.
Right.
So it's the same thing. So if you go upstate, there's little towns called Wurtsboro. There's different places where there were inns. They're all depressed. They're never going to come back because they were built along the canal,
Right.
and some were
Right.
built along the railroads. Now you got the huge Granite Hotel or Grossingers. They're trying to get the gambling casinos up there, you know.
Right.
But the point is, it's exactly what you're saying. And you can look at that map from 1800 to now.
Yeah.
That same things have happened. The Depression, everybody doesn't know what to do. They're sitting there on the porches, just, you know,
Yeah.
not knowing what to do and not knowing the cause and effect of things. It had nothing to do with it. It was that people decided what that land use was going to be, and
Yeah.
they built those things. Now you see the trucks because they're all burning oil. They all have tires. You know, it was like you got to use the product and getting the production done.
Right.
And so they don't. It's not important. I think Ford said that the car was a byproduct. It was a loss. it was Ford Motor Company that gave the loan to buy the car to make them buy it.
Yeah.
So it was like, that's why it doesn't matter, they'd rather lend you money on a Toyota. What do they need to be responsible for building the cars, shipping everything, so Detroit goes down, you know?
Right,
It's the same kind of thing in microcosm.
right,
And so, go ahead. Let me just go.
One thing, community and neighborhood used to be the same thing,
yeah,
right? You could walk to the schoolyard,
right,
right? Now you get bused to the schoolyard, because especially in suburbia, it's somewhere, you know, there's 10,000 kids, you know, there's no neighborhood. Used to go to the schoolyard, shoot hoop, or
Yeah.
play, or kiss your girlfriend or something, you know, like,
Yeah.
a place to go. But now they don't have those. A neighborhood and a community are not the same thing. A
right,
community is, well, we have a community of pilots, or a community of some musicians, or
Right.
they're all over the world. But that change is a big deal.
yeah,
No neighborhood,
yeah,
you know?
So now what is a judge named Judge Dan Polster?
The what?
Judge Dan Polster. His name's a judge named Dan Polster.
Yes.
Out
Yeah.
of Ohio.
Uh-huh.
Federal judge. He's trying to he's actually to come up with a mechanism. People thought he was crazy a couple of years ago. He come up with a mechanism to settle the opiate crisis. And he's having cities and municipalities, it's driven by cities and municipalities, and supposedly the mechanism based on which cities and municipalities have been the hardest hit. So they'll get the most of the settlement.
Of the settlements,
So it's
right.
like it's kind of like the tobacco settlement, but it's sort of not, where you have the actual municipalities got their own private lawyers who are suing the opiate manufacturers
Yes.
and the distributors. And the thing with tobacco is that it was a $246 billion settlement, but I think maybe only 7.5%. A small, maybe 3% or something, some small number, maybe $7 to $8 billion went to the people who were actually harmed by
Yeah,
it.
of course, the lawyers got a third.
Most of it went to the state attorneys generals and to the states. Instead of
Yeah.
the state attorney general who were driving it. Now this mechanism, the municipalities and the cities and the towns are
Correct.
driving it, and the state AGs are trying to play catch up. And so there's a settlement on the table now about like maybe $48 billion. I think about 18 and 25 is going to come from distributors like Amerisource, Bergen, McKesson,
Mhm.
HD
Cardinal Health, and Johnson & Johnson is
Yes.
going to toss in like $4 billion. I think Endo, Teva, Mallinckrodt trying to give free drugs because they really don't have the balance sheet to pay cash. And so now some of the state AGs are kind of balking. I think they're trying to meet now to figure out the settlement mechanism.
How's it gonna make it?
Right, and I
Well,
think Purdue's already been
Yeah.
filed bankruptcy, and they paid like $3 billion, but the settlement, the mechanism was kind of ratified. So I think the other drug companies are trying to say, let's use this mechanism, and we'll pay, we won't get this over with.
I think what's interesting too, is that one, what we're seeing, essentially states' rights is stepping in. But when you look at the states, and we were talking about this earlier, when you look at the states that have so far pursued legal action, it has all been states that voted for Trump. So West Virginia, Ohio, Texas, Arizona, Texas is leading. You're also seeing this kind of dichotomy happening within the medical system. So in Texas, to give an example, 30 hospitals. Arizona, I believe, has jumped on that bandwagon as well. But 30 hospitals have put a suit together to go after Johnson & Johnson, Teva, essentially all of the opioid manufacturers and distributors, CVS, Walgreens as well, because of the increase on pricing to the healthcare system. It's kind of going back to the labor force that's suffering, largely Medicare, Medicaid, or folks that are uninsured. And so when they show up in the ER,
Right.
and it's costing the hospital, so the hospital has to eat a significant portion of that cost, even when they're negotiating with the insurance companies, with the state to pay for these already exorbitant prices that hospitals
Yes.
charge, that's a whole other conversation.
That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying.
Right, but you also, what's interesting too is that right along with that, you have the AMA pushing back,
Right.
saying, yes, we agree that there is a crisis. However, you're tying our hands. So the ability to actually treat our patients is now being hindered. I think it does have some legitimacy, but I also think it speaks to the greater health system, the
Yes.
way that we treat our patients, the way that we diagnose, and frankly, the way that is not in physicians' hands, it's in the insurance company's hands. The insurance companies are the one that writes the SOPs
Right.
for efficacy, treatments, whether a patient will be able to
What's covered,
stay.
what's not covered.
Exactly. So it is, you're kind of seeing this dichotomy, but what's interesting to me is that, when you look at the voter base, especially pre-2016, when everything was all said and done, Trump went into office, all the talking heads
Yep.
were flatly wrong. They had to go back to the drawing board, reanalyze, who are these folks that got Trump into office, although Hillary won the popular vote, but it was still a lot of people that voted for Trump. Who were these people? Well, ironically, it's the same folks that are suffering from
Opiate.
From
the opioid
diminution in service.
Exactly. So even politically, I think it's a bit of a win. So here's where, in my own personal view, I thought Trump lost his base after the GM debacle. 18,000, when he boasted, hey, we cut a deal, we're gonna save your jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And then, a year later, nearly 20,000 jobs leave.
Right.
And a lot of those folks were the same folks, middle America, the homeland, that everyone likes to tout and, and
gonna
throw
still
on the
vote for
flag around.
Right.
A lot of folks began to see and, say, screw Trump. He screwed us over.
Yeah.
However, the touting of, hey, I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to sue
Yeah.
the opioid manufacturers, the distributors, and what's happened? A wall is currently being built. Lawsuits are going forth. Johnson & Johnson has already lost
Yes.
$572 million. Judgment, they're appealing that decision. But the point is that the actions are being
Analyzed, right?
Yep, and if these folks are using that as a benchmark to say, well, he is doing what he said he would do, I think we're gonna see an ironic recycling of the same systems that contributed to this opioid crisis manufacture themselves all over again with just a more concentrated front.
That's right.
Well,
It's the same stuff.
But I think I think it's interesting. It's probably the opiate crisis is probably the one bipartisan thing everybody can agree on. And Bernie Sanders was probably the first one who kicked off. I think in a major way when he was a presidential candidate, he went after Gilead. So Gilead was charging too much for HCV drugs to the veterans. And I think then Hillary, when she became a leading candidate, she started going after drug companies.
Yeah.
So I think Bernie kind of like put this seed out there, and then Trump, after he became president, obviously he said we're going to go after drug companies because of the proliferation of opiate pills out there. They're causing the opiate crisis. So I think Bernie kind of started it, and then Trump. It's a kind of right. Even but this is the interesting thing is this is probably one bipartisan thing everybody can agree on because a lot of state AGs from Democratic states, Republican states, black state AGs, white state AGs are really trumpeting this. Letitia James is going hard after Purdue Pharma.
Yeah.
This guy,
They're out, but we're gonna get rid of that competition.
Right.
But the guy, what's the guy? His name? The guy from Minnesota, his name Elliott or Ellison?
I forget, yeah.
But anyway, I think it's funny that they're going after these opiate manufacturers. Nobody's crediting Trump, and so it's a one thing that these politicians. If let's say, for instance, you committed a crime, right? And I'm a politician, and I think even though it's the right thing to do, if I go after you, I could get put out of office. I won't go after you.
Right.
You may not have done anything wrong, or you may have done something very small.
Yeah.
But if I go after you, I'm not gonna get put out of office.
Right.
So I'll go after you.
So you go after him.
So everybody's going after opiate manufacturers.
Yeah.
The opiate crisis, has when you think of an opiate person who's infected, you think of a white person who's affected. And so these people have been harmed, and there's gonna be some consequences. Crack epidemic was totally different.
They're just a
Yeah.
fall guy.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
I think the case that a lot of the municipalities are making is that because, and they do have, I think they do have an argument, because there's so many opiate infected showing up at our doorstep. We have higher costs for first responders.
Yep.
We have higher costs for police departments, so on and so forth. And then the pushback from some of the courts, like in South Dakota and other places, is that you make the same argument that I would make that if I had a relative that was suffering from opiates,
Yes.
and he lived on my sofa for
Right.
6 months, I got higher costs. Can I charge for that?
Yeah.
So it's like you're charging for something that, I'm sorry, I forgot the legal term for it, but that's it. The question is, same thing with trying to get the gun manufacturers on, that they couldn't get them.
Right.
To the culpable for the.
Right.
Right.
Right,
Same thing.
but the judge, it's a practical matter. Judge Polster from Ohio said that this is a crisis. It's probably not necessarily legal. You start getting into all the legalities, what have you.
Sure.
It has to be. It's a crisis. It's cost somebody. Let's negotiate it. It's impossible to go to court. Impossible for Indo International or Mallinckrodt to have 2,200 legal cases for opiates. You can't go to court 2,200 times.
Right.
We know that somebody's been affected. Let's negotiate and keep this out of the court system because and if
Essentially mediating.
right, that's what he's doing. And people thought
Or just make it bigger, one settlement,
right, exactly. People thought
Right.
he was crazy.
class action,
People thought it
Yeah.
was crazy. Now it's coming to fruition. When he's saying that also, if you let the state AGs, we know what happened in tobacco settlement. $246 billion, only like $7 billion went to the people who were infected. The rest went to states. We know it's going to go to fill
It gets
potholes.
watered down. It gets
fill
watered down.
potholes and
Yeah.
build golf courses. We know
Yeah.
that. You can't let the state AGs get involved. Not get involved, you can't let them lead it. So for the money, this money goes right directly to the people who've been infected. If you come up with like $7 or $8 billion, you already surpassed the tobacco settlement already. If you give 7 to 8 billion directly to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
people
I
who
see
are
the
suffering.
point.
So now they've got 22 billion of cash on the table, 18 to 25 billion of cash, hard cash from Johnson & Johnson, the distributors.
Going to
And then-
people.
Right, and then you also have Indo, Mallinckrodt, and Teva trying to figure out how we can give free drugs because we may not have a balance sheet
Yeah.
to give cash. So you already surpassed the tobacco settlement. That's the argument I'm making on my website, and we have the New York State AG saying we need to get more money from Purdue, because Purdue already giving cash and they want to give free drugs. And Letitia James is saying, well, they made about 13 billion, and they have another, several, the Sacco family has another, $8-10 billion now around it. We should go after that. But at the end of the day, what they have on the table now, with the money from Purdue, and the money is on the table now, you still surpass the opiate settlement by 3 times. Let's give you the tobacco settlement by 3 times, threefold
Yeah.
in terms of the money that's actually going to the municipalities in the town.
Right.
So what happens with that money is a big question.
Well, they're saying they're gonna use it for treatment and for I'm trying to say it with a straight face, for treatment and for prevention. But it does go directly to the municipalities, the people.
No,
who
I
are
get
affected.
you. Yeah.
So they've already surpassed the tobacco. So what is the AG's?
It's going to be a way of shifting.
Well,
Right. It's
I
just
think-
putting out more press releases and getting more publicity for an issue that we know the public's going to get behind, and we can just keep showing the public our value added.
Right.
Well, and I'm mad because I own Indo, and the more
Right,
the
you've
more
been
they
champion
keep,
of
the more they
Indo for 2
keep,
years.
the more they keep hollering about this opium, but also these short sellers shorted Mallinckrodt, Teva, and Indo because they had the smallest balance sheets, and putting it out there to Bloomberg and to CNBC. These companies could go bankrupt, and they have to keep putting articles out there. This company going to go bankrupt was not even the case. Yeah, and these stocks are
Well,
trading.
you know what's interesting too to that point, and I think you might have to jump on that short sellers list for Endo.
I don't. Can we stop the camera for a second? Okay, we don't want the public to hear this. Go ahead.
There's one, when we look at the biopharma industry as a whole,
Yes.
so from smaller players like Oxygen, all the way up to the Gilead Sciences and the Johnson & Johnsons. What we're seeing, the debt to income ratios are astronomical. We're looking at easily 7 to 10 times. So even, a company that's doing a few $100 million, like a Teva, that, from a biopharma standpoint, 400 million, a drop in the bucket in revenue, but when your debt is capitalized at 6 or 7 billion, it doesn't speak necessarily to the cash on hand, but it certainly speaks to, I think, an inevitability of where this is headed, because we're also seeing, like, we can't ignore the shifts that's happening in healthcare. That's going to continue to produce these type of numbers where biopharma companies can continue to survive at the current rates. And so, to give an example, the Affordable Care Act exists in name only at this point. 2018, Texas federal judge ruled out the individual mandate. DOJ proceeded to get it ruled as unconstitutional at that point, and thereby gutting the Affordable Care Act. So it literally exists in name, but we're already at pre-2010 healthcare system.
Yeah.
So
In terms of cost?
Well, no,
yeah, no, like in terms of the way that is what a lot of people miss is that, yes, it provided healthcare for more than 22 million Americans. However, that was not its intended purpose. It was the prevention of medical bankruptcy.
See, that's the difference.
And-
The difference is what we're really talking about is a healthcare business.
Exactly.
Illness care business.
Yeah.
Not a
To your point.
And so
yeah.
if you look at the proliferation and of the pharmaceutical businesses and how big they are now, I'm a little bit older than you are, obviously, but when I was a kid, the doctor didn't work for the insurance company.
Exactly.
So he's an employee of the insurance company. They get to say what's covered or not covered. So if I go, let's say I have a liver problem, right? It's kind of undetectable, but let's say I have a liver problem. And I get a pimple, because the skin is also a filter.
Yep.
If I go to my doctor, he's gonna send me to the dermatologist.
Yep.
And so it's not gonna do anything to heal my liver.
Yeah.
And so that's the point. And you touched on that point at the very beginning of our conversation. There's a cause and effect, there's very simple, practical things. What are the causes of things and what are the effects of things?
Yeah.
So people say, well, he's a pimple, let's go give him some nice pimple cream that we've developed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't do anything for the holistic care this person
Right,
needs.
exactly.
And so we have an illness care system,
Right.
which is really what you were, I think, alluding to.
Yeah.
But the difference between Teva and Mallinckrodt, they all are highly indebted. Very
Exactly. They're all.
But some of them have made acquisitions at the height of, again, going back to pump up these asset prices. These companies made acquisitions at the height of the market a few years ago.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so Endo bought a company called Par Pharmaceuticals. Teva bought a company from Allergan.
Yep.
I forgot the name of the company, but it was like grossly overpriced. And so now the government's trying to tamp down the rising cost of healthcare. So they're accelerating these drug approvals faster, which is hurting the generic manufacturers.
Yeah.
Because they're having more competition from faster approvals. So they get more competition. And some of these companies have branded drugs. Like Teva had a multiple sclerosis drug that's now being hurt by generic competition from Mylan. But the difference is that they all have debt, but Mallinckrodt has a drug called Actol. We don't even know if the thing even works.
Yeah.
And they've been driving, and when they bought Crestor a couple of years ago, they kept raising the price for Actol to pay for debt,
Yes.
to pay off the debt
Right.
that they bought, and so now, because all government driven, the fact that they're driving these stock prices and driving asset prices, so we keep making acquisitions, And if that works, as long as the government's pumping up.
And Pfizer just
Right.
bought, Pfizer just got
Right.
the $5 billion with Celgene.
Right, but,
So-
exactly, but, right, and so, my point is that Actar and Teva don't have a moat. So,
Right.
Mallinckrodt and Teva don't have a moat, so Actar, the top drug, the government's not even sure they're gonna keep reimbursing for that. And they're getting hit with generic competition from another key drug. Teva's, drug, the multiple sclerosis drug is being hit by generic competition, and they have over half of their revenue comes from generics. In particular, in North America, the revenue's in decline because of the so much competition. But Mallinckrodt's problem is that they had a vaginal mesh product that they had to pay out a lot of money, and that's coming to an end.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's coming to an end shortly. But now they have these other drugs like steroid injectables and adrenaline that's growing at double digit rates. They have a generic component. You think of Endo as a generic manufacturer, but it only gets like 30% of its revenue from generics. So it's in the same game, but it's masked because they have these mesh payments, and those mesh payments are coming to an end. So, and then they have this other drug for cellulite. So it's really a growth story. It's just masked because they have all these payments for they can't pay that debt because they pay these mesh payments, which is coming to an end
looking at their
shortly.
balance sheet, that's why they also issued essentially the smallest settlement, with the 2 counties in Ohio of 10 to 12 million, because even the cash on hand is already earmarked that Endo has. So
Well, they also making the argument that they had less market share than Teva and Mallinckrodt.
Right, which speaks to the point of their viability, that either they're going to get bought out, because at this point their balance sheet, I'm not even sure how well the balance sheet can handle a rollout
So what are you concerned about? You talking about the opiate payments?
Right.
I
Their
think-
participation in it, they have the smallest, at least on record. Like I said, those 2 counties in Ohio have already agreed of a settlement of about 10 to 12 million.
Got it.
And the reason that they offered that, because that's really about the limit of what they can handle, being one of the smallest.
Right.
They're one of the smaller players that's being identified as a contributor to the opioid crisis. But to me, that actually speaks to the viability of the company itself and this greater issue of corporate debt, where, unlike 08, 09, that's the biggest difference.
Yes.
Is this astronomical corporate debt. We're already, look at the Heinz.
At the ratio of their income.
Exactly, as a percentage.
Due to just that.
But the point I'm trying to make is that their EBITDA and their cash flow has been steady. I think once these mesh payments go away, they'll start paying down the corporate debt. But the other thing is that I think the opiate settlement is going to be a lot less than what the stock price implies. I think some people think that Mallinckrodt and Teva and Endo are going to be able to offer like some free drugs and not have a big payout. Regardless of that,
it still costs to give free drugs.
That's what you think it is.
But regardless of that,
Well,
I think Teva and Mallinckrodt, I think both are practically insolvent.
Yeah.
I don't think you should put Endo in that category because they have these other drugs that are growing at double.
I get you. I hear you. I hear you.
Twice. I said it twice already. I said it 3 times. And nobody's listening to me.
No, even I can hear you. Sorry.
But anyway, so I think hopefully they think that Teva thinks that the opiate settlement could be done by the end of the year.
Yes.
And so I keep harping on it. It's like you can't get to the state AGs to see the point that you keep. Well, we need to get more money. You still get more money than the tobacco settlement got. 3 times more when you actually look at where the money going to the municipalities. And nobody's going to give you. They didn't get off this nonsense. Nobody's going to write you a check because you want it, and you want to show the public what your value added.
Well, here's the other thing that you're contending with too is, like, look at New York and California, for example. California, I mean, it's like, what crisis is not happening in California? It's literally on fire as we speak. and they have a water drought, and they have a food crisis, and they have a homeless crisis, and it's like literally every natural and man-made disaster is happening in California, and their revenue, the tax revenue, is not meeting the demands.
Right.
So
Oh, I
the
see where you're
same
going to.
thing,
I see where you're
exactly,
going to,
the
too.
same thing is happening in New York.
We need money.
We need money.
Right. Well, it's gonna eat it up.
State
They're
AGs
called-
are looking at this as a potential cash
But
grab.
at the end of the day.
So that's the competing force that I think you have to
Well, yes,
contend
and
with.
they're called transactions of decline.
Yeah.
They've been categorized that a long time ago. So when you have to subsidize things,
Mm.
well, that's a transaction of decline. And if you look at the growth of California, what it was, a lot of people shouldn't be living there.
No.
You know, those fires, certain fires are natural, but big trees don't burn.
Okay.
They don't burn.